I know in the media you always hear celebrities or athletes or rappers talking about getting that prenup and shielding that bag and that sort of thing. And I really don't view it as a practical matter in terms of people coming to me. That's not what I'm seeing.
Welcome to Hot Docket, the show where we talk about winning marketing strategies that have built the most successful law firms.
Join us every 2 weeks for the latest trends and tactics to grow your law firm.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Hot Docket podcast. Today we have on Mark Kachhi of the Mark Kachhi Law Firm, a family law office in Philly. We're going to be talking about what it's like to be a solo, just general Q&A when it comes to family law and the divorce process, and go from there.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Mark, my first question is kind of how you decided you wanted to become a lawyer, and can you give us a little bit of background on yourself?
Sure. So how I wanted to become a lawyer, that kind of goes way back. I'd say my dad kind of always wired me to be one because even as a kid, he would kind of talk to me in the Socratic method. He would always tell me the only wrong answer is I don't know. So I felt like when I got to law school, I was prepared for that. But the way I would say the defining moment was I was in 8th grade. I had an English teacher, Miss Lewis, and we read this book. I'm from California. We read this book, John Steinman book of Mice and Men. And at the end of the book ends with an angry mob about to lynch Lenny, who, had special needs and did something that he didn't mean to do, but he ended up killing somebody. And his friend George ended up killing him before the mob got to him. And the teacher kind of put on this debate over whether what he did was right or wrong. And the teacher turned it into a trial. So my first client was George, and to talk about the mitigating circumstances and how, what he did wasn't as bad as described, and basically advocating on his behalf. And kind of at that point is when I decided I really like this stuff. I really want to go to law school. I went to high school and I went to college. I went to UC Santa Barbara, and I had a little bit too much fun in college, I would say. And I didn't feel I was mature enough for law school. So I went out into the real world. And when I started working, I was working more than 40 hours. And I was like, you know what? If I could invest this much time into work, I can do the same for law school, and I'm ready. And that's when I decided to go to law school.
Why family law?
Funny you should say that. I fell into my lap. So after law school, I worked in financial services, and I did bankruptcy and compliance and foreclosure and that kind of thing. When I went solo, I intended to be predominantly a bankruptcy attorney on the consumer side as opposed to the bank side. And I figured, I would take some criminal cases that came my way and maybe I'd learn a little bit of family law. Well, it turned out that the business that I wasn't really soliciting, which was family law, more and more started coming my way. And I felt that it was more lucrative and, believe it or not, less frustrating than bankruptcy. So it ended up taking over my practice, and that's predominantly what I do now.
Can you tell us a little bit about the type of folks that come to you for prenups?
Prenups and people that come to me for that, I would say it's not what you would think, right? I know in the media you always hear celebrities or athletes or rappers talking about getting that prenup and shielding that bag and that sort of thing. And I really don't view it as a practical matter in terms of people coming to me. That's not what I'm seeing. What I'm actually seeing is people that understand the horrors of divorce and recognize that when you do get divorced, often what happens is this one-size-fits-all solution happens. And they believe that under their circumstances, that wouldn't be a fair way to divvy up assets in the event of a divorce. So they would like to spell these things out. Like, hey, I own this house before we got married. That should not be considered a marital property. Or you've invested blood, sweat, and tears into your business. I shouldn't have any claim to your business. Or I was diligent and prudent and maxed my 401k and you didn't, and it wouldn't be fair to divvy these things up. I would say those are the types of people that come to me for prenups, is people that would like to sort of set the way that the assets get divvied up in the event of divorce.
What about postnups?
So postnups, I think postnups are a very interesting thing that people don't often talk about. I would say a good reason for a postnup is this. So often you're living your married life and you're living your married life in a certain way. And things that you do in marriage, whether it's for out of the kindness of your heart or whether it's to help your spouse out, when it comes divorce time, oftentimes it's going to get forgotten. You're not going to get credit for it. It'll be deemed a gift, right? So a postnup is a good tool to use sometimes if you want to control that. It's a way of settling your property rights. So I'll give you an example. Like, let's say I have a bunch of student loan debt and my wife comes into money and I say, hey, why don't you give me this money to pay off my student loans because it'll better the marriage. Well, maybe that would be a good time to negotiate a postnup and say, okay, I'll give you that, but this is how the property is divvied up. This, in consideration of what I'm doing, this is how the property should be divvied up now. And that would be a good time or a good opportunity to use a postnup. And that's often why sometimes people come to me for that. Another thing to add, an interesting thing that I've seen, is certain states recognize it, certain don't. But in Pennsylvania, you can enter into postnups, sort of list fidelity as a condition to how things shake out in the divorce. So sometimes there's spouses that there's been infidelity and they want to give a spouse one last time and they're willing to give the marriage a shot, but they want to ensure that there's no future infidelity. So it's sort of another way of holding someone accountable in the marriage in terms of fidelity.
What I was going to ask is, what's like the line there? Because I feel like it could easily snowball where it's, okay, something big like student debt. Yeah, I might want to postnup if I'm going to give you $200,000 to pay off your student debt. Is it like, let's say you wanted to buy a car. Do you need a postnup if I'm going to gift you a car, or is that not enough of a gift? Like, where's the line when a postnup could make sense versus not?
That's a good question. It's a case by case scenario and it's based on what you deem to be big or not. I guess the other thing is you would talk to your attorney as to maybe how a divorce could play out without the prenup versus with the prenup, or so without the postnup and with the postnup. And maybe that could factor into, whether you're deciding if it's worth it or not.
Yeah. Switching things up a little bit. Did you always know that you wanted to kind of go the route of being a solo in the market, or at some point did you think about either, joining, I guess, a bigger firm and or creating more of like a volume firm where you hire associates, you do the whole marketing engine type of thing?
So believe it or not, I always wanted to be a solo. Well, I wouldn't say always, right? But in law school, I knew I wanted to be an attorney. When I got there, I didn't necessarily know exactly what kind of law I wanted to do. So my freshman summer, my 1L summer, I ended up working for these two wonderful lawyers who had a small firm in Cincinnati, and they did bankruptcy work. And I really liked what they had going on, and it's something that intrigued me. Then when I got back to law school, I took this class that was kind of like an elective, supposed to be an easy class. It was taught by this professor, Mr. Burleson, and he was a solo practitioner. He was an adjunct. And he would just tell war stories, right? And, when I'm taking that class, I was like, I've seen all these different types of lawyers, these prosecutors, these corporate lawyers. And believe it or not, the guy I want to be is this guy, because he had total autonomy of what he was working on. And, every day is a new challenge, and you kind of controlled your own destiny. And in theory, there's unlimited rewards and that sort of thing. So when I graduated, I knew that I didn't have to apply for this job. So I started working for where I could get in, which was in bankruptcies and foreclosures at the time due to the financial crisis. And then when it was time, I said, by the time I'm 40, I want to do this. I hung my own shingle and got into this.
Got it. I've heard in family law, I think we have somebody we were talking to, that there are all these like absolutely never do this type of things. Do you remember who we were talking to a woman and she was saying like, don't give, what was it? Something like custody. Like, don't let them take the kid away for a weekend or something. It will be used to get. Wow, I'm not gonna do it justice. Anyways, I'd like to hear from you, kind of like, what is the number one and two things that everyone kind of does wrong or doesn't understand when it comes to their divorce, and they should know.
Okay. Well, I mean, if you're talking about custody, one easy thing is be very careful about what you say in text, online, on social media. The test should be like, how would you feel if someone read this out loud in front of a bunch of people? And quickly, maybe you'll realize that things could get taken out of context and judges could look very downward upon negative things you say about your kid's parent. So that's one definitely, thing not to do. The other thing I would say is, um, try your best with custody to sort of have a plan in place before you separate, because when they determine custody, they're using the best interest of the child. And if you're establishing a routine in which you're not really with the child, it's pretty easy for the other side to argue that you're disrupting the child's routine and it's not in the best interest, and therefore you're losing custody, which is not what you ever intended to give up. So that's another thing I would say to be cognizant of, depending on what your ultimate goals are in the custody process. As far as like divorce goes, I would say failure to consider a prenup, at least, just, I'm not saying everyone should get it, but failing to consider it, because there's a lot of bad things that could happen that you probably didn't contemplate going into a marriage.
You know, one thing that I'm like so curious about with family lawyers is a lot of the lawyers we talk to, there's like two very clear sides of the V, right? There's like, you're either a big law defense lawyer or you're a plaintiff's lawyer, like a personal injury lawyer. You're either like criminal defense lawyer or you're a state prosecutor. For family law, it's like interchangeable, right? Because there is no, I mean, the V is between two people and you could be wherever, like, there is no clear delineation between the two. So does that affect like your working relationship with other attorneys in your practice? Because you might be against them one day, but then the next day, I don't know, maybe they're brought in to consult on your case, or you just like are getting a beer with them. Like, do you just have a close relationship with other family lawyers?
That's a great question. So the thing is, people like to call or think of attorneys as a monolith, but they're not. They all have their own personalities. And with family law attorneys, they all, I would say, like, everyone kind of has their own like motto, or their own like philosophies, I guess is maybe the best word. So you might have some that are on this crusade, right? And they're like, oh, I want to get every dime for my client, and I'm only about my client, and I'm going to push to the furthest extent. You might have other attorneys that are like, I understand I need to advocate for my client, but I also have a responsibility to consider collateral damage, right? So there's kids involved, and it's going to get ugly when I bring mom on the stand or dad on the stand, and I'm cross-examining them and painting them in the most negative light, and then these two parties have to go back and co-parent together and go to school events together and stuff like that. You do have to balance your advocacy for your clients, and some attorneys, I feel like it's easier to make deals with because, like humans, not all humans are the same. I feel that some opposing counsel have better ability to look at things objectively, right? and they'll say, okay, I see what you're saying. I can see the court going in this and that direction, and, maybe entering in a deal. And then you could have other opposing counsel who are, oblivious and just think they're going to win every case. They're going to win every argument. And, they sort of have this boxing approach that it's wins, losses, and KOs. And those are the only metrics to measure your success.
Interesting.
Jumping back to the prenups point to kind of not run into those problems down the line. Do you ever find that there are folks for religious reasons do not want to get a prenup? And would you have any sort of advice for those sort of folks?
Yeah. So the religious convictions regarding prenups, what I tell them is, I understand your religious beliefs. I understand your religious faith, and I'm not knocking any of that, and I'm not pushing anybody in the direction of divorce. But what you got to understand, and I'm guessing in most states it's this way, I view your faith as something between you and God, right? You can't control your other partner. So the other side could file for divorce unilaterally, can obtain ultimately a divorce despite your protest, or could obtain spousal support and things like that despite your protest. So I tell them look, let's pray for the best and be prepared for the worst. But if there's reasons and things you want to protect, you got to understand that you can't control what the other side does, how the other side may change. For these reasons, you may want to consider protecting yourself.
Do you have any sort of horror stories you want to tell us?
Yes, I do. And I'm not going to go too deep into the facts, but one thing that I think people don't know is that marital misconduct does not factor into things like the distribution of property. Okay. So what that means is you could have a spouse that commits physical abuse against the other spouse and is just a bad spouse in general, not really pulling their weight, and then decide to leave the other spouse and walk away with a check. And just think about that for a second, right? You have someone that you don't like, and on top of it, they did something really bad to you, right? Yeah, you could go after them criminally, you could go after them civilly, but imagine writing that person a check every month, or imagine like splitting up things that you worked really hard for and having to hand that person over, and the court saying, sorry, yeah, there's nothing I can do. I understand. I agree that your spouse is a terrible human being, but the law is the law, and we're here to carry out the law. So I think that's a huge horror story, and something to think about in your prenup. You could put a provision in there that says, like, if you're convicted of physical harm that rises to this level, you're not entitled to X, Y, and Z. Or that's something you could put in there to protect yourself.
Does that change state by state with like fault or not?
Yes. So again, I don't know if I said this earlier. I'm only licensed in Pennsylvania. So a lot of things I'm saying are probably Pennsylvania specific. I do think that fault states are not the norm anymore. Most states are no fault. So there may be states out there that have those fault provisions. And in the example that I said, that might be an incident in which, that antiquated way of thinking makes sense.
So I'm curious, for folks that want to learn more about this or want to hear about some other stuff from you, are there any places that they can find out about you?
Sure. So I do have a podcast. It's called Solo in South Philly. It's on Spotify, Apple Music, and other places where you can get your podcasts. And I'm in my second season. So in the first season, I interviewed 10 different people that I went to law school with about a decade later, and had them share their journey about what led them to law school, what law school was like, and what they're doing now. So that's a great season to listen to if you're interested in going to law school or interested in the different areas of law. And then this season is called I Need a Lawyer, right? So I'm an attorney, and there's lots of areas I don't practice, or there's lots of areas where I need advice. And I call on different people that I go to that practice different areas of law and basically have them talk about their area of law and give a sales pitch for themselves in case people need them. But so yeah, that's one place to check me out, I guess. My website, occasionally I will blog on things that come to mind, but work tends to get in the way. But www.lawkoch.com is my website for anyone who wants to check it out.
All right. I learned a lot. I thought it was pretty interesting, Bobby. Do you have any questions on your end?
Nope, no questions. John Steinbeck is like a sore note for me. The amount of times people have asked me, are you related to John Steinbeck, is disgusting. Not even remotely the same spelling, but that's my life. So no, I thought it was all good. I particularly enjoyed learning more about the dynamics of family lawyers going against each other, or the different ways that they approach client interaction and all that. I've seen it with some of our clients, and it's interesting to hear first party perspective on it. So thanks again for hopping on with us, Mark. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Hot Docket. We're your hosts, Bobby and Andrew, founders of MeanPub, the marketing agency for ambitious law firms.
Have questions about marketing or anything we covered today? Email us at mark@meanpug.com.